This absolute beauty that I have right here is the 2020 Norco Optic. This bike won Pink Bike's Bike of the Year award, and ever since I saw it there, I have to admit it drew me in because it's a very unique bike in today's bike industry. As bikes have gotten longer and slacker and with more travel, the Optic really tries to do something a little bit different. What I mean by that is that this is a short travel bike that has the geometry of an enduro bike. So this is 125 millimeters of travel in the rear and 140 in the front, but the head tube angle on this is 65 degrees. The bike is long, like 1,235 millimeters of wheelbase, if I'm not mistaken, and 480 millimeters of reach on the size large. So it's definitely a big burly bike that has the short travel. Norco says that that makes for a bike that can do absolutely everything well, and I want to find out if that's actually true. So I regularly ride a YT Jeffsy, which used to be a trail bike, and I think in some ways over the years as it's evolved, it is now more of an all-mountain bike. I think that this is what future trail bikes are actually going to look like, as what used to be called trail bikes are now more aggressive. So since this bike is sold as a bike that can do absolutely everything, I want to test it in 3 places to make sure that that claim is actually true. We are going to be riding where I am here right now in Markham Park to get a feel for flatter terrain, more pedaling, man-made features, jumps, stuff like that. Then we're going to be taking a look at Dupont State Forest in North Carolina for some fast, flowy single track. And we're going to finish by riding in Pisgah in North Carolina for some really chunky downhill. Covering all those 3, we should get a really good idea if this bike can live up to its hype. We're starting our review by visiting Markham Park in the Sunshine State. Mistakenly thought of as flat, places like Markham are actually a phenomenal test ground as they're full of man-made features for a packed ride. We're looking to test jumps, man-made features, and quick transitions in elevation here. So when I say mistakenly thought of as flat, I mean that it has a lot of challenging up and down, not that it has prolonged descending. Going fast here still involves a ton of pedaling, something that the Optic truly shined at.
Little step to get up here. Nice.
The linkage feels very supportive both while pedaling in flat single track and when dealing with small features that require ratchet pedaling. As is expected of a short travel bike, it excels at this kind of riding.
Little drop with a pre-hop and pre-hop. Nice. I came to Markham precisely to ride the jump line with this bike, and it's closed. So the jump line may be closed, but the rest of the jumps are nice and open. And all this stuff around here is just great.
How lively the Optic felt and how much confidence it inspired is something that I did not expect. It felt as safe as bikes with a lot more travel, yet it was easier to get a good pop with it while staying balanced. It was actually an absolute pleasure to jump this bike.
Nice jump into a berm here. Flap 2. Big berm. Little tabletop here. Into a drop between 2 trees. I always feel like I'm gonna smack my bars there. And 3 more tiny little jumps here. These are really nice. And hooked to flat on the last one. The drop.
When sent deep, that drop is probably around 4.5 feet with a not so steep landing. I expected this kind of stuff to be an issue, but not once during this ride did I feel that the suspension was too firm or that it bottomed out.
Something that's really nice about this bike is that it feels super light. I didn't put it on a scale. I have no idea how much it actually weighs, and picking it up feels normal, by no means extraordinary, but when you're riding it, it feels very light.
Which suited the riding here very well. It also played a huge role in making it a great climber over technical sections.
Okay, we got a super techie climb here on the left. Roots, and then over some more roots. Last one, for extra challenge, you go over the rocks here instead of around them. It's a little creaky today. I've been riding this bike for a while now. No creaks. I don't know where it's coming from.
After retorquing the pivots to spec, the creaking stopped completely. For what it's worth, it never happened again.
I am struggling so much with the heat right now. It's definitely summer in Florida. I feel like my riding is kind of crappy. I haven't even done half a lap of the park, and I'm already at that point where I keep making stupid mistakes all over the place just because of the exhaustion.
The feels like this day was at 102 Fahrenheit or 39 centigrade, so I ended up cutting my ride short. Although I wasn't filming, this was not my first time riding this bike at this location. All the testing that I needed to do here was already completed. For this kind of riding, the Optic absolutely blew me away. It's among the best bikes I've ever gotten my hands on, and admittedly, if I only rode here, it would probably even be a better choice than the Jeffsy. But there's more to a bike than just riding it in one place. So let's take a 12-hour drive north to Dupont State Forest and go for a lap of Hooker Creek and Ridgeline to test the bike on fast, flowy Singletrack.
There's no other way to put it than this bike just rips up and down.
This loop starts with a rock-armored staircase that always takes the wind out of me. While this was no exception, the bike felt super easy to pedal up. Since we already know this, I didn't put too much emphasis on the climbing portion of this loop, and instead, we're just going to be focusing on the descending. The hubs on this wheelset are basically silent, a significant departure from the swarm of angry bees that I'm used to. It was a bit odd to ride at first, but it turned out to be amazing for video to hear the interaction between the tires and the trail. The trails at Dupont are mostly smooth and hard-packed. On days like this, after a bit of rain, they seem to offer infinite grip despite the small rock patches hiding abound.
Way too much brakes.
I'm sure this can be done much faster than I'm going, but I already felt like I was flying on this bike. As a matter of fact, one of the most likable characteristics of the Optic for me is that it's incredibly intuitive. There's no oddness to the linkage or weird geometry to get used to. For me, it just seemed to work well the second I got on it.
Whew! God, I love that trail.
Hooker Creek, the trail you just saw, is pretty much all-out speed straight down. In contrast, Ridgeline is, well, not too different actually. It's also all-out speed, but the main difference is that it rarely goes in a straight line. Of all the trails I rode with this bike, this was my absolute favorite.
It's so lively and poppy.
The bike felt at home on this kind of terrain.
It feels like it always wants to play. It's so weird to ride with the silent hubs.
The long geometry and slag head tube angle seem to provide gobs of confidence to this bike, while the hyper-supportive linkage and short travel provide quick response from inputs. The bike feels like it's always riding high in its travel, but it's not harsh. Instead, it uses the little travel it has exactly when needed. The combo makes it respond instantly to pumping into corners or to the backside of a roller, while keeping speed or making it up without pedaling is extremely easy. If you do brake too much and need to throw a few pedal strokes in to get back up to speed, the suspension feels great despite always being in the fully open position. This bottom section of the trail is the hardest to me. The corners really require a lot of commitment to rail them properly, and the braking bumps going in don't help at all. I ended up doing my personal best ever on this trail, which I've ridden so many times, with this bike on this run. At 3 minutes and 50 seconds for the whole trail, that's a full 8 seconds faster than I've ever done with my Jeffsy. On a separate note, how the KOM can be another 40 seconds faster than that is absolutely mind-numbing. How can some people go that much faster?
I am out of here. Time to head to Pisgah.
Our final ride for this video is going to be just a short distance away from Dupont, in the world-famous Pisgah National Forest.
We'll be doing most of the Black Mountain Trail to put this bike through its paces in seriously tough terrain.
The one thing that I have to talk about is how well this thing pedals. It's a very interesting choice by Norco that they did not put a climb switch on it. This has an ultimate DH shock. As the name says it, the ultimate DH was thought out for downhill. Norco says that that's how they're able to give this bike the downhill performance that it needs, despite only having 125 millimeters, while also retaining its pedaling ability. And so far, I'm sold. I have to admit I was a bit wary at the start, but it really works. If you look, I'm probably halfway through the cassette. I'm not used to going this fast up this.
When it comes to single track climbing, I did not feel the need to lock out the suspension. With how efficient the bike felt so far, I do have to admit I was surprised that in this scenario I couldn't feel any significant difference from my Jeffsy. It's a great climber, but on the rooty stuff, it didn't feel better, which was what I thought would happen.
So the idea behind coming to this specific trail is that this is much chunkier than the other stuff that I've ridden with the Optic so far. Since it's touted as an all-around bike, I really wanted to bring it to something just a tad harder to see how it felt. And so far, I can tell that I don't have as much rear suspension, but I don't feel like I care about it. How do I put this? It is not as smooth, and you definitely need to be more careful with it, but it does everything just fine. And you gotta remember, I only have 125 mil in the back here.
If you've ridden this trail, you already know this, but if you haven't, this is one where the GoPro effect plays it big. Listening to the bike interact with the trail will give you a better idea of how rough the terrain is in comparison to how the video makes it look. Upper Black Mountain is extremely technical, with lots of rocks and roots in all possible and weird angles. As soon as it smooths out a bit and you get some speed, the trail throws you back into insane chunk out of nowhere. While the Optic managed everything this trail could throw at it, my level of concentration on these sections was sky high. I felt like I had to work a lot harder than on the Jeffsy. Particularly, I had to be very precise with what line I took. Knowing this trail helped me out quite a bit. I feel that if I were riding blind, I would have had a much harder time.
Got a little squirrely there.
I want to make clear that I'm not saying that this bike is bad at this. It's just where I notice most difference from what I regularly ride. The moments of sloppiness or where you get bucked in an odd direction required much more effort on the Optic.
Whew. It's definitely more work than the Jeffsy. Absolutely no doubt. But it does it extremely well. More chunk. Whoop. Oh, the brakes are feeling a little iffy. Maybe they're a little bit overheated or too cold, I don't know.
I had taken a good 10-minute break between Upper and Middle Black Mountain. After the brakes cooled off completely, they felt a little odd for a while. I kept on riding cautiously for a little bit and they came back to regular power. In general, the components on all builds of this bike are great, but for some reason, all of them only have a 180mm front rotor. And worse, only the top of the line C1 and CAXS come with metal pad ready rotors. The C2 and C3 come with resin only rotors, which is a bit of a letdown. This bike would benefit greatly from a good 200mm rotor up front. In all the time I spent on the Optic, this was my only real complaint about the build.
Got scared.
Can't really say what happened there. I've ridden that a bunch of times. Maybe the brakes got to my head or something. Whatever it was, it didn't last long, as I promptly made it to the end of Middle Black Mountain. After comparing segments on Strava, while I felt like I was super fast, here I was still significantly faster on the Jeffsy.
I know in the GoPro it looks like nothing, but those sequential steps are a ton of hits. And you know what's interesting? I don't know if you can see it, but here's the mark for all of the travel. I'm almost there, and here I'm almost there. I am not using all the available travel, and this is some chunky stuff, so this speaks wonders about the linkage design on this bike. From here on out, the nature of the trail changes. It is much flowier, so less roots and rocks. It's not that they're not there, they're just not the prevailing feature. Oh, that did not sound good.
I checked later and I couldn't find anything, but it was so loud that the camera clipped and cut the sound out. I think it was a knob biting the side of a rock or something, but thankfully, considering the bike isn't mine, nothing really happened. The end of Lower Black is in some ways similar to Ridgeline, just a lot techier and with a few wall rides sprinkled in. In this stuff, the bike did amazing, but honestly, I was already pretty tired after a big day of riding in Dupont and Pisgah, so it wasn't going very fast.
That was a phenomenal ride. Thank you, Black Mountain.
Well guys, there we go. That was a couple of days worth of riding in a single video over 2 different states and 3 different riding locations. So I hope you really got to see what this bike is capable of. I am personally absolutely blown away by the capacity that this bike has. I expected it to be good at some things and not so good at others, and I just can't find flaws with this bike. You know, it does everything so well. Now, would I prefer to have this over the Jeffsy as an all-around bike? Well, I wouldn't, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't. It's a question of what you really want the bike to do. This bike definitely requires more finesse, and it is, in the really chunky stuff, a little bit harder to ride, despite the fact that I think it's equally capable. The Jeffsy just has that extra suspension that really forgives, and it makes it a little bit easier to ride. And that's why I say it's a matter of personal preference. Now, what I will say is, if I had the money to have them both, I would definitely have both. And I am pretty sure that I would find myself riding this one more often than the other one, just because of the terrain of where I live. So when I think of places like Markham Park that are flat and they have just, you know, punchy ups and downs, but not prolonged descending for a very long time, the pedaling efficiency on this bike is so great that I think maybe I would ride this more often. But I would still prefer to have my bike in my case, because when I travel, I like to have that extra beefiness available if needed. But if you look at this bike and you think that ticks all the boxes that I'm looking for in the style of riding that I do most often, you will not be disappointed. This is the most amazing short travel bike I have ever ridden. I usually don't like bikes with that little travel in the rear, and this thing just blew me away. So yeah, that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're thinking of buying one of these things, I hope the video was actually useful and not only entertaining. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. I do my best to answer every single comment that is at least coherent. In the meantime, I will see you for the next one, and happy riding. That's that. Ease a wrap. If you're wondering why I was able to record the conclusion in the same spot that I did the intro, is because really I already rode the bike in North Carolina first before coming to Markham, and I already did my ride here, so I recorded the intro after doing all of the, you get it. I tested the bike before I recorded the outro. See ya.